Senator Rucker asked, has anyone ever asked about aborted fetal cells to make vaccines? She asked Dr. Young about that. So what I have with me is the printout from the Centers for Disease Control. And I know you can't see it from there, but every vaccine that is made with cell lines from aborted babies is highlighted in yellow. So the adenovirus vaccine, the DTaP IPV HIB called the Pentasil vaccine, the hepatitis A, the Havrix, the hepatitis A Bacta, the hepatitis A, hepatitis B called Twinrix, the MMR2, the MMRV, which also includes the varicella virus, the rabies virus, the varicella Varavax vaccine, and the zosters all are made with cell lines from aborted babies. So there are 10 different vaccines that are made with cell lines from aborted.
Over 26 billion tons. For each American, it's about 20 tons. For people in poor countries, it's less than 1 ton. It's an average about 5 tons for everyone on the planet. And somehow we have to make changes that will bring that down to zero. It's been constantly going up. It's only various economic changes that have even flattened it at all. So we have to go from rapidly rising to falling and falling all the way to zero. This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. Let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. Do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. But there we see an increase.
Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is funding factories for each of the 7 most promising ideas for a vaccine, even though Gates freely admits that only 1 or maybe 2 of them will actually be used. I'm now joined by Bill Gates. Pleasure to have you on, Bill.
Good to see you.
So if you were to explain to people in general, would you tell them that we now know the coronavirus is more deadly, less deadly, more transmissible, less transmissible? How do you characterize this one?
Well, we know that if we do these extreme social isolation measures, we get the reproductive rate below 1, which means that the total number of active infections starts to go down. What we don't know is we go slightly back to normal, which activities create the risk of a rebound. And so we need to put into place a very dense testing regime so you would detect that rebound going back into the exponential growth very quickly and not wait for the ICUs to fill up and there to be lots of deaths. You know, if you see the hot spot, you can understand the activities causing that, change policy there and get it back down to into the decline. So that the brute force tactic that was used did work. It worked in every country. But that's caused such immense damage. Now we want to back off from that. And we're a little naive about how to prioritize those activities. We need the testing. We need strong leadership where the scientific community and the politicians are saying, okay, what's the value? Things like school obviously have a very high value if we can figure out a format that's not driving a lot of infection.
So you talk about testing. Everybody talks about it. And it seems bizarre, just from the outside, that it would be so hard. I mean, this is the richest country in the world. people have made analogies to wars. During World War II, the United States went from a standing start, zero planes, to being able to produce a plane every 63 minutes in one of the Ford factories. Why can't testing be ramped up to the million a day level that a lot of people, experts believe would be necessary to help reopen?
Yeah, so it looks like with new machines and using them in a better way, we'll be able to get up to 400,000 or 500,000 a day. That's just barely enough for really doing the tracking. There's some very innovative ways of running those machines or eventually getting the strip test that could take us to higher numbers. The key thing about the US, though, is this focus on the number of tests understates the cacophony and the mistakes we've made in our testing system. The access to that testing system is very unequal. The wrong people are being tested, and anytime you don't get results in less than 24 hours, the value of the test is dramatically reduced. And so the US is unique in terms of it's who you know, whether you get in the front of the line. Asymptomatics can get in front of the line, and you get these lines that are way too long.
Let me ask you about the vaccine that you've been so involved in. So when I talk to experts, there's a range of views. One of which is, look, we may not get a vaccine. We don't have vaccines against some other coronaviruses. There are some viruses for which you don't get one. And on the other side, people telling me, well, with so many efforts being made like yours, the government is also doing one, the British government is doing one, the Chinese are undoubtedly doing one, we'll actually end up with a vaccine much faster than people are predicting.
Well, it's very hard to compress these time frames. And, if everything went perfectly, we'd be in scale manufacturing within a year. We may not achieve that. It could be as long as 2 years. There's over 100 efforts. What we need to do is pick the most promising of those, get money, so we're going full speed, build the manufacturing in parallel, some of which is shared, like the fill finish, which is the last step, where there's nowhere near the capacity for the 7 billion doses. So we need to do that.
But are you optimistic it'll be on the shorter end? I mean, I've heard people say maybe by December we could imagine starting production.
No, I don't. Moderna, you have to do these phase 3 studies that help you understand if somebody has a condition X or Y or Z, does it create a side effect? There's people with defective immune systems. There's all sorts of things. So the size of the phase 3, the global regulators are going to have to get together and decide how many people, what length of time that goes in. And you'll have to trial where there's a very heavy infection rate. So, the idea of being in manufacture by the end of the year, that's beyond my what's likely. Dr. Fauci and I have been fairly consistent in saying 18 months to not create expectations that are too high, because this influences, short of a miracle set of therapeutics, this influences when we get to go back to true normal. The efficacy of vaccines in older people is always a huge challenge. It turns out the flu vaccine isn't that effective in elderly people. We clearly need a vaccine that works in the upper age range because they're most at risk of that. And doing that so that you amp it up so it works in older people and yet you don't have side effects. If we have 1 in 10,000 side effects, that's way more, 700,000 people who will suffer from that. And that actual decision of, okay, let's go and give this vaccine to the entire world, governments will have to be involved because there will be some risk and indemnification needed.
And this is a guy that openly says we need to vaccinate people to lower the world's population, and that says kill old people, but now he really cares about them a lot. This virus release, we've always said on air for several decades, is the globalist main takeover system, because it gets every checkbox they need of locking things down, getting rid of cash, surveilling people, being able to lock up, arrest whoever they want, being able to create total fear, being able to absolutely starve the third world, and be able to force things into your body that then slowly debilitate you with binary weapon systems and kill you.
A recent comment by Bill Gates in a Reddit Ask Me Anything on the topic of the coronavirus COVID-19 has had many people worried that we are about to see the implementation of the Mark of the Beast prophecy. Someone asked him what changes are people going to have to make to how businesses operate to maintain the economy while providing social distancing. To this, Bill Gates replied, "The question of which businesses should keep going is tricky. Certainly food supply and the health system. We still need water, electricity, and the internet. Supply chains for critical things need to be maintained. Countries are still figuring out what to keep running. Eventually, we will have some digital certificates to show who has recovered or been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it." It is his last remark about people having some kind of digital certificate to prove that they've had the vaccine, been tested, or have recovered that got so many people concerned about a possible quick implementation of the Mark of the Beast. Revelation 13:16-17 says, "And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." Now, a digital certificate is not necessarily a mark in the hand or forehead, as it can simply be a digitally signed, immutable record through the use of blockchain technology uploaded to the internet that registers how many people have been tested, how many people have recovered, and eventually how many people have received the vaccine for the coronavirus. However, what has got a lot of people worried about the comment is that Bill Gates has a couple of projects he is funding which, combined, would look much more like the Mark of the Beast prophecy. The first one, which directly relates to a vaccine for the virus, is something called a quantum dot. This is something researchers from MIT have been working on. This article from ScienceAlert.com describes it as an ink that can be safely embedded in the skin alongside the vaccine itself, and it's only visible using a special smartphone camera app and filter. In other words, it's something like an invisible tattoo, which is only visible through the use of this special smartphone camera app and filter. The article later says, "The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded the team's research, which was published in the journal Science Translational Medicine on Wednesday, that is the 18th of December 2019. According to a Scientific American story, the project came about following a direct request from Microsoft founder Bill Gates himself, who has been personally involved in efforts to eradicate polio and measles through vaccinations. Now, the article says that this is still at the proof of concept stage, so it's unlikely that such a thing would be ready to be implemented worldwide with the coronavirus vaccine. However, because things are moving fairly quickly and governments are taking unprecedented measures to combat the virus, there is a possibility that such a technology could be used for a COVID-19 vaccine. In such a scenario, one could imagine the possibility of governments declaring that only those who have the quantum dot tattoo to prove that they are vaccinated can have permission to enter stores to buy things, and that only store owners who have been vaccinated would be allowed to sell, and thus fulfill the Mark of the Beast prophecy to that point. Such a suggestion is perhaps the climax of all anti-vaxxer concerns. At a time when there would be the need to convince everyone to take the vaccine, such a measure would likely have the opposite effect, pushing more and more people into the anti-vaxxer camp, for fear that the vaccine itself is a fulfillment of the Mark of the Beast. It remains to be seen whether this coronavirus vaccine will include this quantum dot tattoo technology. However, I personally believe that the actual Mark of the Beast is going to do a lot more than just provide a stamp to prove that you've been vaccinated. And that's where the other project where Bill Gates' Microsoft company is engaged in is very concerning. It is called ID 2020. ID 2020 is an alliance of partners like Microsoft, Accenture, which is a biometrics digital ID company, Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance, and the Rockefeller Foundation. dedicated to creating and promoting a digital biometric identification system based on the blockchain that can be used for offline and online purposes. It is very active in trying to fulfill the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals to, quote, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration, by 2030. Now that we are facing an apparent global threat from the coronavirus, dishing out vaccines to everyone in the world will likely push the digital ID agenda. Now at this point, nobody is mentioning microchip implants as the solution to it all. But as we continue moving towards the Great Tribulation, it is very likely a worldwide digital ID system for everyone with the use of a microchip implant that can be used for buying and selling will be presented by the coming world leader as the solution to all the world's problems. Most people will accept it, desperate to find a solution to the unrest, hunger, spread of diseases and economic woes, and they will see anyone who refuses to cooperate with such a system as the worst possible kind of people. This is where we each need to confront ourselves. How willing are we to suffer for the kingdom of God? Are we willing to die before we will accept the mark of the beast? Some people are aware of the prophecies, but their solution is to buy guns and to defend themselves with violence. Not only is this contrary to Jesus' example and teachings, it only serves to strengthen the system even further as they justify more control and surveillance. The greatest need we have right now is for spiritual survival. Jesus told us that the last generation would see wars, nation rising against nation, many great earthquakes, pestilences, famines, troubles, and fearful sights and signs in the skies, and that these would be the beginning of sorrows, a prelude to great persecution of all true believers. He says, "Take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and the cares of this life, and so that they come upon you unawares. For as a snare shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore, and pray all